Are the CrossFit Games dying? Let's get into it. I've been thinking about this topic for a while because I keep hearing it around the community. Is CrossFit dying? I think it's an unfair question to some degree, but when you really think about it, they've had an extraordinary amount of obstacles and hurdles they've had to overcome the last few years, some of which were self-inflicted, some otherwise. I think they've dealt with everything from CrossFit being sold from Greg Glassman to private equity, to COVID hitting, to having to move the games to the ranch, to Dave being fired, Dave returning. They've had obviously a change of venue a couple of times from Madison to the ranch, back to Madison. Now they're going to Fort Worth. So with that amount of inconsistency, it's no wonder that people are still asking the question, is CrossFit dying? As I've spent time thinking about it, I think the question is still largely unanswered. I do, however, believe there are a few things that CrossFit needs to do to ensure that it doesn't come to fruition, and I'm going to share those with you today. Before I do that, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button as well as the notification bell. That way you don't miss anything coming out here on the channel. So the first big thing I think CrossFit needs to do is improve their storytelling. So I've been following competitive CrossFit for well over a decade now, and I've heard the same common complaint year over year over year. The complaint is CrossFit only covers the front runners and ignores those not racing for the podium. So you're paying attention to the favorites and ignoring those that are in kind of the lower quartiles. While sometimes that complaint is invalid, it is often true. In my opinion, the games team for years has been so focused on finding the fittest on earth and creating a spectacle at the games that it's been notoriously bad at storytelling. Here's an example, and I'm going to underscore why it's so important that they get good at this. So for the last few weeks, Dave Castro, to his credit, has done 10 to 15-minute interviews with every single athlete competing at the individual level of the games. I admire that hustle. Dave's a hardworking guy, but he was largely unprepared for these videos, didn't really set them up to build the brand of the athletes, and he used it as a platform to kind of slowly leak games info, which quickly took the story away from the athletes and put the story squarely on him. Additionally, the CrossFit Games team, they shared some of the interviews like on the CrossFit podcast, but they certainly did not use their massive platform to promote these athlete stories. Storytelling is unbelievably important because you need the CrossFit Games to go deeper than just Dave Castro doing mostly unprepared interviews with the competitors. Look at what you've seen recently in the Olympic coverage. You'll see excellent examples of, largely and mostly unknown athletes introduced to a rabid fan base and have done a terrific job with it. Fans need to know why they're rooting for someone. And for many, if not the majority of the spectators live and online, this is going to be their first experience with many of these athletes. You can help build athlete brands as well as introduce them to potential partnerships, which are going to strengthen the games in total. The cost of this is minimal for the CrossFit team because you have dozens of creators that are perfectly happy to shoulder this burden as long as you're willing to collaborate with them, which in the past they have struggled to do. The second thing they need to focus on, I think this is a really critical one, is the athlete and the fan experience. And I realize those feel like two different things, but they're really kind of two sides to the same coin. When you think of the athlete experience as fans, we often see photos or Instagram posts of athletes getting swag and how excited they are about it. But it's often been viewed as the athletes being really grateful to be at the games and the CrossFit Games team, other than giving out swag, not really caring other than you showing up at your scheduled start time. I think there needs to be a huge focus for making sure athletes not only feel like, but actually get a world-class experience. That means more than just swag. It means you have to have top-notch facilities for them, concierge service, make sure that there's a more intimate experience. Some examples of that would be interviews with all the athletes, again, helping them build their brand and not just the front runners. You have to make sure you're talking to everyone. Again, telling their story, making people understand the why you want to root for them. And then making sure you have some unique opportunities for the athletes to meet with fans live and in person and engage with them, whether that's press conferences or meet and greets or whatever it may be. And I realize they're there to compete, but The sport is at a critical juncture where you need to grow the sport. And a huge part of that is through growing athlete brands itself, the representatives of your sport, if you will. Speaking of those representatives, the second thing they need to lean into, and this is really more along the line of fan experience, but I guess you can consider it athlete experience too, is you have to utilize the legends in your sport. You have so many fan favorites that have quote unquote retired, and CrossFit acts like they don't exist. You've got the Matt Frasers, Rich Fronings of the world, legends like Julie Fouché, Chris Spieler, Matt Chan, Miko Salo, like all these OG athletes that are still very popular in the sport that you're not leveraging. By making them part of the event itself, you accomplish what should be a monster goal for the CrossFit Games team and HQ in general, which is you're playing to the base of your fans, the OGs that continue to long for the good old days. They continue to complain about how it used to be, and they don't love the direction it's going now, where you can follow up on how these athletes are still part of CrossFit and how they still love CrossFit. It's going to recognize the long history of the brand. It's going to show gratitude to those athletes and the affiliates that they came from, who have quite literally shed blood, sweat, and tears to build this. Again, this is just about storytelling and brand building. I've mentioned this in a previous episode, but Rogue has done this very thing at the Rogue Invitational. And by all accounts, it's been a large success for them, not only for fans, but for the legends athletes themselves. And it's not a heavy lift for the event. The next thing they need to look at, and I really think they need to look at this through a very critical lens, is partnerships and collaborations. For a long time now, the Games has felt like this search for the fittest on earth with no recognition that it's still a sport. And in order to have a sport, that requires fans to grow that sport. If finding the fittest on earth is the only goal, then move it back to the ranch, quit streaming it, and shut the hell up about it, and let us get on with our lives. The reality is, we all know that headquarters wants to grow the sport as much as we want this sport to grow. There's a potential huge opportunity that's both going to help the brand and by default, the affiliate. So with that in mind, you need to utilize these partnerships and support them and build trust with them. You can look back over the last few years where this has been a big fail for CrossFit as an example, where they went from FitAid to Monster to O2 to Jocko on the drink side. It shows a lack of partnership success. Brands don't abandon your championship event when they feel supported in getting something out of it. Probably the more accurate way to think about this is that these are relationships, but you're calling them partnerships, and partnerships go both ways. So if you're giving someone access to your event, but charging them to be there, that doesn't make you a partner. That makes you a landlord. You need to be more collaborative, engaged, and strategic long-term with the partners. It often feels like these partnerships to me are like at a risk year over year because they change year over year over year. In the past, you've had brands that have come up under the shadow of CrossFit, like FitAid is a great example of one that was really squarely connected with our community, and they were quickly abandoned for a larger brand that simply had more money that was not really connected to our community. And so the two ideas I would give them here to fix this is, one, I think you need to engage with the community and simply ask, what brands and services are you using? What do you like? What do you want to see CrossFit and the CrossFit Games partnered with? What's a value add to you? I think that helps you eliminate big screw ups like the Monster deal, and it gives your community a voice. Secondly, I was starting engaging with and promoting brands that they probably view as competitors, like Hard Work Pays Off, Proven, Street Parking, those types. And the reason I would partner with them and encourage participation and promote them, even though these are paid for services that are squarely in our space, is you're getting more fans and views on the sport of fitness. And that will absolutely eventually pay off in revenue and affiliate growth. And I would argue that all of like those, as a real example, all have paying CrossFitters that are doing a different service that would very likely, if they're not already a part of affiliate, would happily join an affiliate and continue to do both. Your goal here is getting more fans and more views on the sport of fitness with the mindset that the rising tide is going to rise all ships. And then last, when I think like recently, the communication coming out of CrossFit headquarters has been far more verbal in pointing out that there's a real lack of positive coverage and recognition of the work they're doing around affiliate growth or things that positively impact a brand. And it's probably come off more like we're just pissed that people are complaining about us. But the reality is they're not getting a lot of positive coverage. I used to have this boss who would always tell me, John, there's no such thing as anonymous giving. Don't let anyone else tell your narrative. Basically, what he meant by that is no one's going to tell your story better than you tell your story. So what you have to be thinking about in the games, and again, back to storytelling, is that you have all eyes of this crazy, rabid, cult-like fan base watching what you're doing. You need to be loading commercials and talking points in between events and heats and promote that important work that's being done and educate your base. Tell your story. If you're growing affiliates and improving profitability, share it. If you're creating scholarships for disadvantaged youth, share it. If there's projects in the work that are unfinished, but you think it's exciting and the community's going to love it, share it. The bottom line is the community wants to know that you care more about CrossFit and the CrossFit Games than we care about CrossFit and the CrossFit Games. I truly believe that if CrossFit can focus on great storytelling, improving the athlete, fan, and partner experience, and help people understand and visualize the work they're doing, not only will CrossFit not die, it'll thrive.